Good evening, everyone. My name is Meredith Tui, and I'm the Nutrition Education Program Manager at the American Nutrition Association, the ANA. The ANA is very pleased to be hosting Dr. Deanna Minich and Yunez-Behm tonight to explore 2021 trends in the personalized nutrition space. Dr. Minich is a nutrition researcher, educator, and functional medicine trained clinician with a unique approach to nutrition that combines physiology and psychology. She has served on the Institute of Functional Medicine's Nutrition Advisory Board and Curriculum Committee, in addition to being a faculty member teaching nutrition for the Advanced Practice Module for Environmental Health. Her academic background is in nutritional science, including a master's degree in human nutrition and dietetics and a PhD in medical nutrition sciences. In conjunction with her academic degrees and extensive teaching experience at the university level, she is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition and a certified nutrition specialist. Dr. Minich has over 20 years of experience working in both the food and dietary supplement industries and has more than 40 published scientific articles in journals such as Nutrients, Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism, and Nutrition Reviews. Victoria is a certified nutrition specialist with a master's degree in nutrition and integrative health from Maryland University of Integrative Health, where she teaches culinary nutrition and life cycle nutrition. She is also currently the manager of nutrition science here at the ANA. Welcome, Dr. Minich and Victoria.
Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Yunez-Behm, and I'm here with Dr. Deanna Minich, and we're so grateful to have you with us, Dr. Minich, for this conversation about 2021 trends in personalized nutrition.
Exciting. Good to be here with you, Victoria.
Thanks. So I think what's come up this last year and has remained relevant is the global pandemic. So I thought we could start with a little conversation about immune resilience, which the ANA has identified as a trend for the upcoming year again. And one of the things that we've talked about before in other ANA webinars, and you touched on many times with our immune resilience series of Facebook Lives, is just the multitude of factors that come together to build immune resilience, and nutrition being one of, I think, the most important, but certainly lifestyle and environmental factors play a critical role as well. So thinking about the influence of immune regulators in inflammatory and oxidative pathways, obviously related to COVID-19 itself, but also many of its complications and comorbidities. I feel like we're talking more and more about these underlying factors: inflammation, oxidation. And so, yeah, what's coming up for you around these topics as you continue to research and think about personalized nutrition in relation to COVID-19?
Oh, it's such a good question, and you framed it so nicely. We're coming off of the heels of 2020 when there was so much focus on avoidance, trying to avoid the pathogen, the virus, and there was some talk about the immune system. I do think that some people really started on that trajectory of thinking about their health in a bigger way. And then when we had the conference in November on immune resilience and talking about all of the different things that nutrition professionals can start to talk about with their clients, I think you actually just mentioned it, this whole aspect of inflammation. So whenever I think of the immune system, I don't think about it in isolation. I think about it as a systems web. And one of those pieces of the web, to me, is inflammation, because if the body is inflamed, whether it's through lifestyle or through food, it really sets this alert, and that puts the immune system on alert. And I think that as nutritionists, one of the biggest things that we can do to affect change is to be looking at the foods that provoke inflammation and the foods that reduce inflammation, and to just even start there, especially because inflammation is the bedrock for so many different diseases. And I do want us all to be thinking about the connection with mental health, because even though we're talking about immune health, one of the areas that I think it leads on into, and we see crosstalk with, especially this year in 2021, will be mental health. In fact, right before I got on this webinar, I was doing some research on sleep. I did not know that 50 to 70% of Americans have some type of sleep disturbance. And because of COVID, that has amplified. And if we're not sleeping well, we don't eat well the next day. We tend to crave carbs. And then it's like our whole day is primed and not ideal. And then we go back to bed, and then perhaps we have another cycle of poor sleep. So I think we have to penetrate that web somewhere, wherever our client is willing to start and wherever we feel most comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Just looking at the whole picture, what are all of the factors at play for us right now? And I know that my sort of trajectory of my nutrition and my exercise and my mental status throughout this year has ebbed and flowed, and it might have been, a different intervention was needed at a different point in this last year. And I've been able to pay more attention to that. And I'm sure we all have our own expressions of what imbalance has looked like, and we need to pay attention to that with our clients. I was talking to someone earlier today, and he said, I wonder if the pandemic might be a motivator for people who maybe previously said, well, I'm not going to worry too much about my chronic disease because I'll just get the vaccine, or, this isn't really affecting my life so much. But now that many people with chronic diseases and even immunocompromised individuals are at high risk, we don't know how long, vaccines are going to be effective and if we're going to need to be revaccinated. There's so many questions around COVID. Do you think that it might become motivation for some individuals to say, well, I really need to get the rest of my health in order now because there's this acute issue that is worrying me?
Fear does spur some people to change. Not everybody. Some people go in the opposite direction, and they kind of wallow in kind of the aspects of, comfort foods. And I kind of see it in 5 buckets. So if we can imagine applying personalization to this spectrum as well, I think that maybe for the healthy people, there's a certain segment that got healthier because they could be at home, they could cook, they could walk throughout the day, they didn't have a long commute. There could be another segment, number 2, which would be the healthy people that got unhealthy. And maybe that was perhaps, I think of working mothers. Like I think of my sister who was at home with her daughter and having to juggle a job and not getting to the store. So I kind of think of that group. And then I think of the other side of the spectrum, the people that were unhealthy, 2 different groups. The third group would be the unhealthy people that became healthy because they had the time, like you just mentioned. And then the 4th group would be the unhealthy people that became unhealthier because, again, there was the emotional component. And then I think you could have people like me who stayed in the middle. It really didn't. I mean, there are certain things that maybe I changed a little bit, but I don't think I changed anything too radically different. I'm pretty on the straight and narrow with my eating. Maybe exercise, I improved a little bit, but I pretty much hovered in the middle, and I have that little zone. So I think there could be at least 5 personifications of where we went with the pandemic. And Victoria, you mentioned the vaccine, and I just want to mention, sometimes with fear, there's always going to be something out there, whether it's a pathogen, a virus, and now people are very concerned about the vaccine. I recently interviewed an immunologist by the name of Dr. Heather Zawicki, who knows a lot, and you know her, right? And so she knows a lot about vaccines. That's what her graduate work was on. And I asked her, I said, Heather, is there data to show that people who are better nourished and have better lifestyle actually fare better from a vaccination? Because I wasn't privy, I haven't gone into the data. That's not my area of expertise. And she said, yes, there is. So if it's not for the virus, then, and if we're not getting vaccinated, then we better take care of ourselves, right? We can make all these decisions, all these critical paths, depending on, but all of those critical paths are leading us to the same top of the mountain, which is getting healthier.
Yeah, and on that topic, I've seen this pop up here and there over the last few months, the statement, vaccines are harder to deliver and potentially less effective at stimulating an immune response in those who are undernourished. And that's sort of what you're getting at. And I would also add, in addition to undernourished, poorly nourished individuals. So that's great to hear that there's data on that. And I will do some furious Googling after this to find some of those resources.
I just leave it to the experts. I just asked Heather because I figured she teaches this, she lives it, she breathes it, she consults on this, and I better ask an expert just what is out there. And she actually had COVID herself. And, she describes how she when she got it last year, she was healthy. There still can be things that happen, but potentially we're buffering those effects. And even what I'm most concerned about with COVID is not necessarily the infection, because for most people that might subside within a couple of weeks, but it's the long-term effects that remain unknown, right? And that's what she brought up as well. And so if we can take care of those comorbidities and we can take care of our health, then potentially we can mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah. I'm so curious about the long haulers and have been doing a little reading on that, and also the concept of immune phenotype as well. These sort of groups of people that have similar immune responses and patterns of immune response, and how that plays into the severity of COVID or the type of symptoms. I think that's going to continue to be an important part of the conversation. And with the long haulers, I was thinking about that question of what makes people susceptible. And you remember Michael Snyder, who you interviewed and was doing the smartwatch. I actually participated in that study after he talked about it, but he was looking at digital monitoring as a way, with heart rate monitors and like Fitbit and Apple Watches, to see if they could identify pre-symptomatic COVID positive people based on heart rate. And they did find that something like 63%, it was a small study, a small cohort that they eventually analyzed the data for that got COVID, but 63% of the COVID-19 cases could have been detected before they were symptomatic, which I think is a pretty stellar finding. So I'm really interested to see how sort of the wearables and technology become part of the conversation with COVID, but also just, with regard to personalized nutrition in general. We're experiencing this really big surge of interest in technology and what that can bring to bear in terms of gathering data and continuous monitoring. So maybe we can kind of shift to that as the second trend that we've identified for this year. Before we get into it, what are you watching? Like, what are you really excited about with regard to the technology that's coming out in the field right now?
Well, you know me, it's color. And one of the ways to track our nutrient density through photographs, through the pictures that we take of our meals. And there are companies actually working on this where there's, app technology where you can take a picture of a meal, and through the pixels, through however it's conveyed, there's an algorithmic way to assess potentially the phytonutrient quality and quantity of a meal. And this is, of course, in a very emerging stage, right? This is just in discussion. It's just kind of in that nascent phase. But I do think we need faster, just being on the pulse with what we're taking in immediately. Like the sooner we can get that information, the better. It's like we can't wait 2 weeks to get a lab back anymore. I want to be able to take my smartphone, scan my finger, and get my vitamin D. Why should I wait for a week when I could potentially have somewhat of a different level at that time? So I think we're going to get faster, and we are going to use these technologies to modulate our mood. Again, I think bringing it back to mental health. And I do see a fertile space for nutritionists to start to penetrate the mental health market, the food and mood, how you eat, how you feel. I mean, it's all this intersecting web. And if people, I'm always getting this question, Deanna, what apps can I use for relaxation or for meditation or before I go to bed at night? I mean, these are more common questions that I'm noticing. And so if we can take those metrics of maybe it's autonomic nervous system function through heart rate variability as one potential variable, because maybe like the pictures of food and all the quantification parts aren't really there yet, but HRV is there. And I was using that in the clinic in nutrition practice even some years ago, helping people to sync up how they feel with their food choices. And I think that, again, I'm putting my finger on the pulse of all things mental health this year as it intersects with immune health. But I do think we're moving into that mental space because people are really worn out. They're really stressed. They've been at home a long time. For some people, they kind of have a groove. And for other people, it's just, relationships, partnerships, marriages, strained working relationships. And so I do think I mean, just again, looking at the sleep data, that tells me a lot right there.
Yeah, because there are a lot of really great avenues of technology to keep our eye on, not just the quantification of food, which I'm interested to see where that goes and how far we can take it, while it's still meaningful information, and how what breadth of food types they're going to be able to use the photo-based analysis for. I'm really curious to watch that. And the self-administered tests, like the at-home testing, I think is going to really change how we think about our health and the way that we're able to continuously monitor all kinds of things, our nutrient status, and in addition to, I mean, obviously a lot of people are using continuous glucose monitors and learning a lot about how their body responds to different types of meals and food combinations. So sort of this quantified self idea, I think is really taking hold, which is interesting to experience. And then I think that, gene-based reports continue to be informative for many people as we sort of compile all this data. And one of the things I talked to Jessica Tichenall about on a previous webinar was just how much nutritionists have to look at in terms of just quantity of data about a person. And it can be super overwhelming. It's very time consuming. So another thing I'm sort of watching is how practitioners can compile data meaningfully, what sorts of tools are going to emerge for us to do our jobs more efficiently.
Oh, I am right there with you. In fact, I just spoke with 5 nutritionists over the past days, and they all basically said very similar things that, when you dive into working with a client, it's like almost like a full-time, it could become a full-time job. It could become very taxing, especially if you care and if you are the deep digger who's looking for the root cause, right? Then that person's on your mind, you're thinking about it, and it's one person, right? And so how do we manage that? How do we thread it all together? And I don't think we have a good answer.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm hoping that there can be more algorithmic ways to sync up personalized aspects about an individual, and then basically cobble together some kind of, just maybe a starting place, maybe a general protocol, but even that is, pie in the sky. And I think that there always has to be that human element of talking with a person. And, it's really interesting because when you listen to people who have been in practice a long time, and I just had the pleasure of talking with a gastroenterologist not so long ago, I think it boils down to not so much technology, but listening. It's the therapeutic encounter. It's holding the space. It's listening to their story. And they'll tell us what they want to do, what they think is the problem. And all we have to do is listen and pull out something small to create that ripple effect. So I think there's the age of technology, which we all love. We like the whole aspect of genetics and labs and thinking about how are we going to create this protocol and mastermind all of this information. And then there's the other side, which is the art. It's the healing space. It's the intuitive space. It's holding space, and it's being present for whatever shows up and letting the client basically champion their journey. You're there as a guide, as a witness. As one of my teachers would say, she would say, you're the hollow bone. You just show up and you hold that space for that person to be witnessed. And so I think that there's something about both of those streams. There's something about the science of it, and there's something about the art of it. And so then the question is, how do we bring those two things together?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Very well said. And I think that I've had this thought sort of ruminating and been reading a little bit about the medicalization of healthcare, and where are we losing the care part and really skewing the other way. And healthcare practitioners, especially, we're all crunched for time. Insurance reimbursement is a huge driver of the whole way that we do medicine and do nutrition. And I think holding the person as person in your interaction is such an important part of being an effective practitioner, even if it's not super high tech. It can be very high touch and be just as effective, and effective in different ways. So very beautifully said. It's not one of our trends, but I think that sort of just reimagining the health care experience and the interaction, especially in a digital age.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, if you look at what has happened to us over the course of this year, we have become more digital, and think of how many people are just craving human interaction and contact. So I think, maybe we have been shoved so far over to the land of technology in Zoom that the pendulum is going to swing, where when the floodgates open, when we're able to go out and socialize, we're going to take that to the next level. There might be more developments on that socialization front, which could be exciting. How we do groups. I always think that when we have dynamic tension in society, it stimulates creative processes. Things that we would not have normally come to will be arrived at because we were under that tension. And so all of this, again, is a playground for opportunities to bubble up.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other places that I think things are bubbling up, so to speak, is in the realm of the microbiome. And you've kind of talked about research, not just in the gut microbiome, but across, the entire body and even our environmental microbiomes. And I think there's such interesting work being done about the bacterial milieu that we live in and how important it is for not just our health, but not just our physical health, but I think also mental health. And you're speaking a lot about mental health. So what are you watching in the microbiome world right now?
Yeah, I love it that you mentioned this, right? Because just like you said, the gut microbiome is hot, hot, hot. I mean, there's just so much out there. I do think that more extrapolations are being made. It's kind of like nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics, right? It's almost like if you see one gene and then we extrapolate it out to these massive effects when that may or may not be true. And I think what's happening with the microbiome is that there can be method concerns. There can be shifting day-to-day variation. So my take on this is a word of caution, especially when you talk to microbiome researchers, because they will tell you that there are a lot of unknowns. And I also think one of the things that we learned from the pandemic was that it wasn't just the gut microbiome. We learned that the gut microbiome influences other microbiomes, like the respiratory microbiome, and that the oral cavity has a different microbiome than the nasal passages. The one I'm most interested in, though, and I think this is where we're heading as a trend, is the skin microbiome. The skin, and I was listening, I think it was at the ANA conference in 2019, listening to Dr. Rob Knight. I think that was the conference I heard him at. And he was talking about localization of different microbes and taking samples from people on their bodies, different parts, even the face. Different parts of the face have different populations of microorganisms. What does that all mean? I don't think we know. We are still groping in the dark of trying to figure out, wow, how microbial we are. We don't live in a material world, we live in a microbial world, and we are basically commanded through those microbes. So I am really curious about how we're going to look at developments in the microbial space, but more at that level of point of care, more at that level of understanding and having a relationship, like through the skin, right? And I think that the skin is such a big sensor. It's such a great conduit to the gut. It tells us so much about the stress response, and it's one of our largest organs. I'm fascinated with the skin. And just even in nutrition, my goodness, we see so much in the way of eczema, psoriasis, acne, all kinds of skin conditions that people are very preoccupied. And when something influences somebody's skin, that's usually when they start paying attention. Yeah. So I'm excited for the microbiome, like you mentioned, and I'm excited for the different populations on different body parts.
Yeah, I think like you said, we're just scratching the surface. And I know Chris Mason was swabbing, subway stations all over New York City and was really excited to share that research with us a few years ago. And they've found, completely unknown species of microbes all around us. So I'm really, really curious to see where that goes in the future. And I know it's a very hot topic. And even I attended the NIH Precision Nutrition Conference back in January, and they were talking about the importance of microbiome research and microbiomics in precision nutrition, personalized nutrition for the future. So I think it's really going to take up a lot of the imagination of what personalized nutrition means as we learn more and more about our interactions with the microbes in and around us. And I think you might have a Madonna spoof on your hands there with microbial.
Well, that was one of my social media posts where I did have, we live in a material world, and I crossed out material and I hand wrote the microbial.
Somebody's going to come out with that. JP Sears can do that one for us.
Well, I just want to say this, Victoria, because thinking more philosophically about nutrition and where it's going, I always say, here's another meme. I always say that nutrition is the art of relationship. And it's the art of relationship with those bugs that live on us and within us. It's the art of relationship between ratios of minerals or ratios of essential fatty acids. It's so much more than one thing in isolation, right? It's not just lactobacillus acidophilus, right? It's how diverse are these microorganisms? How are they relating to one another? Nutrition is the art of relationship. It's not just the relationship of nutrients to our bodies, but it's how we relate to a client. That is the medicine. That is the nutrient, if you will. And so I think if we can stay focused on the whole rather than on the little itty bitty parts and kind of get swallowed up by a SNP or swallowed up by a vitamin D, and remind ourselves to zoom out and say, wait a minute, nutrition is about relationship. It's not about copper. It's about copper vis-a-vis zinc and how those two are playing with each other, because high copper could provoke potentially a zinc deficiency, right? And if we have sufficient levels of essential minerals, we can offset the effects of toxic metals. So again, it's like this relationship. I don't know. So that's why when you talk about microbes, it brings me into a philosophical spot of just realizing that it's like, how are we in alignment? And if we are we eating in alignment with our highest needs, our nutrient needs? And Victoria, I think that another trend, as you're probably going to get to, is also about behavior change, because most people know the basics of what is good for them and what is not so good for them. But how do they get there? How do they relate and have a better relationship with themselves, with self-care practices, with their bodies, honoring those messages? Again, it's bringing back that art, the art of listening, and even to our own bodies.
Yeah, talk about relationships, right? Like our relationships with ourselves, especially right now, we have a lot of time to ourselves, perhaps, and also, the people that we live so closely with. I've been thinking a lot more about the food environment, nutrition outside of my own physiology and my own lived experience, but that of my family and the people that I interact with, and what sharing food looks really different. And I come from a Hispanic background, and that's our life together, is the table. And so I was actually going to ask you, just thinking about, and this touches on mental health nutrition, it touches on behavior, but thinking a little bit about sort of these links between our microbiomes maybe and the foodways that we have in our communities, and our connection with the surroundings that we're in. And many of us don't really have other places to go right now, and we're very much in our little environments. Just sort of how we think about relationship and nutrition as something that is very micro and really macro, almost cosmic in a way, all at the same time. I just, to get philosophical there, I think I've been really thinking about like how that thread kind of goes to the smallest molecule, and also just our whole community, and what food access looks like right now, and how are we getting food, and from where, and all of those big questions about foodways and sustainability too.
You said it beautifully. I can't really add much to it other than to talk, and it's beautiful how you connect those dots, right? Because it gets back to ancient traditions, which talk about what is in one is in the whole. What is in the whole is in the one, is in the individual, right? As above, so below, as within, so without. I mean, this is like a standard proverb throughout time. And so, yes, the micro and the macro. And I'm sure that some people have had some aha moments throughout the pandemic where they're thinking, wow, maybe I need to grow my own food. I'm eating in isolation. I'm really missing that sense of community. Perhaps there's something I can do outside and connect with in relationship with food. I know that I started thinking about food a bit more, food security. One of the other bigger questions that has come to me throughout, and I even presented to congressional staff back in July 2020, because congressional districts wanted ideas on what can most people do. And my answer to them, it was very simple, and it was about eating the colors of the rainbow, right? How can people get more foods, even if they're prepared foods, frozen foods, canned foods, more colors of foods? Let's just keep it simple. Even simple tea, just dried foods like legumes that are inexpensive but accessible to most people. Because I am thinking about that, people that aren't getting out. And in fact, the people that have been on my mind are people that are more confined and not as functional. Maybe they live alone. And I was even thinking about them with the recent snow, and I was thinking, wow, all of the people that might be stuck at home and aren't able to access, can't get out to the stores, just who's helping those people? And then there are the people, like you mentioned, which have financial constraints. And so then we think about what are the common denominators, right? Like where can people meet in the middle? And again, I go with like the spices. There was a really neat study, and Victoria, I think that all of us as nutrition professionals really need to be exploring spices because most people have them and they're highly medicinal. I was just reviewing a study last night showing how a 6-gram spice blend, and it had a lot of different spices in it, like 8 different spices, but it was 6 grams, so a little bit more than a teaspoon. Having that in conjunction with a high saturated fat, high carbohydrate meal offset much of the inflammation from that meal postprandially. Now 2 grams of the spice blend did not do it. You needed to have a bit more, but it was like a very, it was like corn muffin, or it was like stuff that, we wouldn't necessarily want our clients to be having. But to think about, whether it's the Hispanic population, all the different the ethnic groups out there, they all have some connection into spices, I think. When I think of Eastern Europeans, I think of different parts of Africa, I think of Middle East blends of spices. And this is something, again, most Americans have black pepper, which we know is potentiates turmeric and has incredible anti-inflammatory effects. Most Americans have cinnamon. Well, that's great because that's an insulin sensitizer. Most Americans have something like oregano or dill, one of those two, right? And so a nice antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial type of spice, even if they can start with a small toolkit of spices. I think that there's going to be some innovation in waste streams of food, because we're getting to the point where we're looking at sustainability of packaging, but we're also looking at how do we not waste whatever is being thrown off in the process, right? And so I think we're going to get more, not probably us as nutrition professionals, but we're going to start seeing that come through, because we're going to have food shortages. There are food security issues. And so I do think that the industrial aspects of food might evolve into looking at creative ways to harness all the parts of foods, whether the pits, the peels, the pulps, every part. I mean, think of how many people throw away their broccoli stem, right? And they just use the floret. They get rid of the other part, which is also medicinal. So I think we're gonna have to get more creative about these things.
Yeah. Oh, you remind me of I had beets with beet greens, and I had them in the fridge and I was all excited to make beets and beet greens. And I came back and my dad had cooked the beets and I couldn't find the beet greens. And I was like, where are the beet greens? And he's like, I gave them to the chickens. And I was like, oh, come on. He didn't know, he didn't know you could eat them. And I think, you know, part of it for nutritionists is education, you know, about how we can use all parts of the food. It's on the shelf for a reason, and they can't sell you something that's poisonous. So you can have confidence in eating the parts of the food that you can buy. And also around spices. I think that's just such a simple, one of those simple, beautiful examples of what everyone can do with something they probably already have. And you know, garlic and ginger and things that people aren't, you don't have to learn how to use them necessarily. You know, I think that there's a lot of heritage in how we use these spices, and you can always learn more. One of the small gifts I think my mother-in-law will say that I was able to impart to her was how to use spices and herbs in cooking more. And just those little things. I think talking about behavior change right now might not be the time to make massive changes. We might not feel equipped. We might not have access to the gyms and the spaces that we used to access, and food might be hard to come by if there's financial constraints or jobs were lost. And I always want to be really sensitive to that for many of us who have lost something this year. And also, where can empowerment come in with small, achievable changes that can be made over years even. And I think that the most sustainable change is slow and steady. And it just involves a sort of transformation over time. And if you can transform your cooking this year, that's amazing. And if you can, you know, get a stationary bike, that's amazing. And just really celebrate the wins for our clients right now, because I think so many people are struggling with massive fear and loss. So I think just that holding the tension, like you talked about earlier, just so important for practitioners. I'd love to just end on this topic of equipping practitioners, because you know, there's this shift towards digital interaction, which has positives, I think, for a lot of people, and probably negatives for others who are in practice. Are as many clients reaching out to nutritionists this year? I don't have any data on that, but you know, I could see how people might not feel like they want to or can afford a lot of these services that are not covered by insurance, et cetera. And so we've done some webinars on digital practice, et cetera. But I think just what I'm looking at in the future is really making sure that our workforce is trained, but also accessible to that question of like, who can access these services, who can pay for them, who is benefiting, and is our interaction meaningful and relevant to the community, to the person sitting in front of us. So we have certainly our certification and training programs like nutrigenomics and the upcoming program for physicians, which we're really excited about.
Yeah.
And then also just, you know, training for how to interact with and serve communities in need. And that's something that the ANA is paying attention to, and I'm personally really committed to. So I'm just curious sort of what you've seen in terms of healthcare delivery, and what are you thinking about with regard to nutrition practice right now?
It's a great question. And I think every nutritionist is very different in terms of their capacity, where they're at on their path, their professional path. Some people are just starting out, so they're kind of wobbly, they're not really sure, and they kind of feel like, oh, is this bad timing or good timing? And then I think you have the seasoned practitioners who are ready for a tech pivot into more tech, because they already have a good basis. And then there's everybody in between. So I think in general, what's at least what has nourished me is to do a combination of community type group events, which can offset a lot of the, you know, I always feel like whenever I'm doing an individual consultation with one person, it could feel very like intensive. It could feel very immersive to the point that you're just giving. And so I like the whole aspect of diversification, having some individual one-on-ones because you learn a lot and you can help people on their path. And then having community group type of classes. And nutritionists can very easily do this. And people love groups. In fact, I have shifted to more groups because I realize the power of the group. The group heals the group. You don't have to take it all on. I do think that there's opportunity to do group sharing of recipes. They motivate each other. They inspire. There's conversation. So it's not just you kind of doing your thing, right? You again, and bring out, you hold space for the richness of the group to come out. And then I think you have your pet projects, whether you, now that some nutritionists might have time, you write a blog, or maybe I'm always encouraging nutritionists to write a paper and submit it for publication. Get that publication you've been waiting to get that submitted. I mean, if you have the time to just put it together. And some of these blogs that people write are so in depth. And I often think, why aren't they just publishing like a short, rapid review communication on that? So that's another avenue as a nutritionist, right? Is to do that. Or maybe it's to start to develop a YouTube presence. So you kind of have to figure out where do you want to play? What are your gifts? What's your skill set? Where do you feel called? And for some of us, it might be, no, I want to be the one-on-one. If I think of my husband, he's an acupuncturist, and he is definitely the one-on-one, just person in the room, applying the needles, doing the art, doing the craft. Wouldn't like to be teaching a whole group anything. And then other people are very well suited to do that, where they teach a concept, they're bringing it to the group, they cultivate that discussion. And there are so many free ways to do that, right? Just even on, I just use Facebook, a Facebook group. I know that some people are moving away from Facebook. Some people like Instagram, then go to Instagram, and cultivate your presence there. What I like about YouTube, and I'm saying this without really doing it well, because I haven't really invested a lot of time, but what's nice about YouTube is that YouTube and Google are both part of the search repository, right? So people that don't know you can find you through a search term if you were to be on YouTube. So there's leverage with each of these different platforms for different demographics. That said, don't feel like you have to do it all, like your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your Pinterest, and your I think quality and knowing who you are is the most important thing for really cultivating your platform long term. It's best to be more loyal, create that dedicated following than to spread yourself thin and get stressed out and you're not getting any revenue or any leads on this, right? And so I would say, maybe it's just a YouTube, Facebook, and or Instagram, and maybe LinkedIn occasionally. But, figure out what works for you specifically, because again, everybody has their gifts, everybody has their interest, and you're going to draw different people, different demographics from each of these different types of technologies.
Yeah, and that's coming from a pro. I think you're one of the nutritionists with probably one of the biggest followings. So I hope everybody takes that to heart, like do what you love, pursue what you're good at, and find your avenue. I gave up on Twitter almost immediately because
Twitter,
forget it.
I'm off. I haven't looked at Twitter in so long.
Yeah, and find where people are trying to find you, and I think that we all, I think there are enough followers to go around. I have an abundance mindset. You're not, I think there's this sense of competition just because as practitioners we're in, the marketplace, but also we have, we're in this for a reason, and it's to help people, and those people will find us. And I feel really strongly that kind of being centered and authentic in our expression of our practice will resonate with the right people. And I think, Deanna, you're just a phenomenal example of what that can look like in practice. So I'm really thankful that you're with me this evening and that you've taken some time out of your schedule to spend talking about trends for 2021. Thank you so much. And we'll see you very soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And so curious to see how everybody else's path will blossom. And I'm sure everybody will keep in touch with us on our social media pages.
Yeah, absolutely.